Hi, my name is Aanerud, and today I'm going to be Will Rogers for you. So I'll tell you a little bit about Will Rogers first. First and foremost, he was a cowboy. He was an expert with the lariat. Now imagine, from the age of 17 till 34, this is the way he made his living, by twirling the rope. He did this in Wild West shows, in vaudeville, and finally on Broadway with the Ziegfeld Follies. Now, if he were actually here and doing this little program for you, he'd do you a couple rope tricks. But I'm not going to do that for two good reasons. Number one, I'm not very good at it. And number two, he was the best there ever was. He is still in the Guinness Book of World Records because of being able to twirl the rope. Now, when he became 34, he started talking publicly, and that made all the difference in the world. Within a year, he had a radio program. Then they invited him out to Hollywood to do movies. He was in 60 different movies, 24 full-length talkies that he was the star in. In the early 1930s, his movies were the highest-grossing movies coming out of Hollywood, which meant he beat out Shirley Temple and Tom Mix and Rin Tin Tin. He used to do this circuit, this lecture circuit. Okay? Remember, they didn't have television, and they didn't have the web, and very little radio. So what people did is they went from town to town, and they did lectures. And the lectures could have been on religion or politics or science. He did comedy. So he went from town to town doing this. At one town, he was doing his program, and a newspaper editor thought it was so good he wanted to put it in the newspaper. So he asked him to write it down, and he wrote it down. They put it in the newspaper. Within a year, he was a syndicated columnist doing a weekly column for 500 daily newspapers worldwide. Some of those newspapers were putting his column on the front page. Can you imagine that? They certainly don't do that today. Well, I'm going to give you a lecture from Will Rogers. Now, this is not one he actually gave, because I want to give you his life story in his own words. So, however, when I introduce Will, it will be in his words, all right? But there's a couple of things you're just going to have to accept. Number one, Will was never as old as I am, okay? He died in 1935 in a plane crash in Barrow, Alaska. He was there with his friend from Oklahoma and pilot Wiley Post. So consider that he didn't die, all right? And 20 years later, this is what he looked like. He never was as tall as I am, okay? So you just have to deal with that. And he was never as heavy as I am, but if 20 years later, he may have been. So with that, I'll give you Will Rogers. Well, I just come by to say hello is all. So howdy. How are you anyway? I noticed in the promotion for this program that I was listed as a lecturer and a humorist. Now, I just want you to know that I prefer the latter to the former. You do know the difference between a lecturer and a humorist, right? A humorist entertains. And a lecturer, well, lecturer simply annoys, is all he does. So, however, I've been on these lecture circuits long enough that I have seen lecturers that do quite well for themselves. And some of you might want to become a lecturer, so I can tell you how. What you got to do, you see, is you got to write a book, generally about sex. I have never written a book about sex. Not that I wouldn't be willing, you know, to write a book about sex. It's just that I really believe you got to know more about a topic, you know, before you write a book about it. Not that you got to know anything about a topic to write a book. I mean, come on, folks, if that was the case, half the books in the library would never be written. No, I don't want to write a book about sex, but boy, like most of you, I'd probably like to learn more about it. Well, as you can tell, I have a little difficulty knowing exactly how to begin these little conversations we have. Well, I suppose the way to start is at the beginning, with them three all-important words. I was born. Well, now, I realize that ain't exactly the beginning. I know 9 months prior to that, something happened that, well, as a matter of fact, that is what I know about sex. So, I was born. Well, I was born on Election Day. Now, not too many people admit being born on Election Day, but I do. I suppose that's why I got it in for the politicians the way I do. You know, not for me, of course. It's in memory of my mother, because I barely remember the day at all. The way it was in them days, women could not vote, you see. So all the men folk, they had gone off to vote, and they left my mother home alone. And she decided she better do something. So she gave birth to me. That's what she done. Well, I was born a Southern Methodist. I'll probably die a Southern Methodist, but folks, listen, I have been all over the world, and I have seen nearly every religion being practiced. And I'll tell you that I do not believe that there's one single religion. They all seem to preach loving each other. Now, if we just did that, wouldn't that help a lot? Now, I'm a Southern Methodist. Now, there are also Southern Anglicans and there's Southern Baptists, and you know why there are those. You know, it's something because of the Civil War. You know, we could reduce the number of religions a lot in the United States if people would just convince the churches that the war's over. I was born in the Indian Territory, what you know call Oklahoma. My father was 3/8 Cherokee, and my mother was 5/8 Cherokee. And that makes me... Listen, folks, I never went far enough in school to know exactly how much Indian blood that gives me, but I'll tell you there's nothing of which I'm more proud than my Indian heritage. Now, people ought to be proud of their heritage. I had a woman come up to me just the other day to let me know that her ancestors come over on the Mayflower, and she was very proud of that. She had a right to be, even though she had nothing at all to do with it. But you can be too proud. Now, about the 7th time she told me that her ancestors come over on the Mayflower, I reminded her that mine met the boat. Okay? Now, imagine how it would have been the other way around. You know, imagine if the Indians were on the Mayflower and the Pilgrims were already on land, right? You think they'd let them land? Fat chance. Fat chance. Listen, it was the biggest problem the Indians had in those days was their immigration policy was just too liberal, that's all. I was up there in New England not too long ago. I was speaking to a group at New Brunswick, Massachusetts. I think it was a Rotary or the Lions or somebody. And I happened to mention that the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. Well, I created a storm. I mean, I didn't mean to, but I did. It seems that the good people of New Brunswick, Massachusetts, believe the Pilgrims first landed there. I guess it was to steal some Indian corn or something, I don't know. But the authority for this revelation is the New Brunswick Chamber of Commerce. They have a motto. It is, do not be misled by history. Pilgrims first landed in New Brunswick. Any pilgrims that landed anywhere else were just not official, and them that landed in Plymouth Rock, well, served them right. Pilgrims, boy, they were an interesting group, weren't they? Always dressed in black. You know, they had buckles on their boots to hold their boots on and buckles on their hats to... Well, I'm not sure why they had a buckle on their hat. But they always carried a rifle. Every time that you see a picture of a pilgrim, they always have their gun with them. You ever noticed? If they're out plowing the field, they got a gun. If they're in having a meal, they got a gun. If they're in church, they got a gun. Of course, I understand why they had it when they were in church. It was to make sure they got what they were praying for. Generally, it was a little more Indian corn. Now, the Rogers clan come from Georgia. You know, that's where all the Cherokees came from. The whites called them one of the 5 civilized tribes. Now, they lived in houses, they farmed the ground, and Cherokee even had a written language that they wrote in and could read. And they owned slaves. I think that's why the whites thought they were civilized, because they owned slaves. They were doing quite well. Mother and son doing well was a national cry. Childbirth was not grounds for divorce. The Cherokees were coming along quite well. But for some reason, the white population in Georgia was growing faster. We finally figured it out. They was importing them, is what they were doing. And at one point in time, they just decided that they needed more land. So they decided that they had to take the Cherokee land. So they just picked up the Cherokee, just picked them up and moved them out there to the Indian Territory. It was called the Trail of Tears, folks, and there was a lot of death and a lot of just was not a good time. It was not one of the high points of American history. But when they got them out there to the Indian Territory, they gave them a treaty. And the treaty read, "You may have this land as long as the grass grows and the water flows." Kind of poetic, ain't it? Seemed kind of ironclad too, you know, until they discovered oil. Well, the treaty talks about water and grass. It doesn't talk about oil, for goodness sake. But don't worry, the government took care of it all. Now when they move Indian to another ground, they just make sure that they move them to places that don't have any grass and don't have any water, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, I was born. I was born in a little town called Oogala. Now, I claim Claremore as my home. I mean, come on, folks. Life is tough enough without carrying Oogala around with you your whole life. I went to a little one-room schoolhouse there north of Claremore. It was an Indian school, all Indian, and I had Indian blood in me, so I could go. Had just enough white blood to make my honesty questionable. But I was there for a number of years, and the people that run the school come down to see my father, Clem, and suggested that I might go elsewhere. It had nothing at all to do with my white blood either. They thought that I needed a little more discipline. My father agreed. So he decided to send me to a military academy. Now, a military academy is a place you go, you know, to learn how to become an officer in the military. Now, can you imagine Will Rogers, an officer in the military? I mean, if it doesn't scare you, it scares me. Well, the first year I was at the Kempler Military Academy, I was in the 4th grade. And the second year I was at the Kempler Military Academy. That time I was not in the guardhouse. I was in the 4th grade. I didn't see a whole lot of progress going on here, so I just gave up on school altogether. Just gave it up. Probably the worst mistake I ever made was not taking a chance on the 5th grade, but I gave it up. Now that's a wrong-headed thing to do. Now I am doing well, all right, but I am the exception to the rule. Generally, those with more education do better than them with less. So, you know, parents and grandparents, make sure you keep your kids in school as long as possible. All right? But because I'm doing well, people think I know. So they ask me things, and, well, I give them answers. So I have people come to me, and they want to know, will college pay? And I said, of course college will pay. You know, as long as you're a basketball player or a football player, it pays very well, you know. Those athletes will come to me, and they'll say, when should we turn pro? And I said, well, certainly not until you earn everything you can in college, you know. And I caution those athletes, you know, when they do leave college, they cannot take their cheerleaders with them. Things get very quiet after graduation. People ask me if they should go to law school. Well, if you got a chance to go to law school, of course you go to law school. I know lots of people who have gone to law school. They all seem to be doing quite well. Some of them are even practicing law. Well, my father decided that if I wasn't going to school, then I'd have to work around the ranch. Now, he called it a ranch. I mean, he could have called it anything he liked. He owned it. He could call it a farm or a hacienda, but he called it a ranch. I mean, it didn't cost any more on the property taxes, so that's what he did. But he had hired a man to work with him, and the fellow knew how to twirl the rope. Well, for the first time in my life, I became intrigued with something. So I had him teach me everything he knew about twirling the rope. And when I learned everything he could teach me, I just kept learning more, and I developed things on my own. My father would come by from time to time because I was twirling the rope 4 to 5 hours a day. And he would come by and he'd say, you know, Will, you ought to work more and rope less. And of course, I, being a son, I just ignored him. Mother would come by from time to time and suggest that I might read more and rope less. And of course, she was right, but she's a mother. You know, mothers are always right. Well, I kept doing it for years and years, and I finally wanted to find out just how good I was to compete against somebody else. So I decided at 17 years old to go to the state fair in Oklahoma City and try my roping against those other ropers, right? So I had to go up to Claremore to catch the train to go to Oklahoma City. And as I was waiting for my train to come in, another train came in from the east, from Arkansas, and this pretty young lady got off. Now, she was there to visit some relatives, and her uncle was late in picking her up, or the train was early. No, trains are never early. He must have been late. So I was 17 years old. I had spent all my life on the ranch. I mean, I was a little shy, but somehow I got the gumption to talk to her. And we talked there for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And I got her name and her address. Third best thing I ever did in my life was to get her name and address. Her name was Betty Burke. Well, I went off to Oklahoma City, and I competed. You know, I was as good as I thought I was. I won every award there was, every trophy and every ribbon. And I really thought that was pretty good, but that wasn't the best thing. The best thing was that there was a fellow in the audience who was looking for a roper for their Wild West show, and he offered me the job. And I grabbed it. Second best thing I ever done in my life. It got me off the ranch. Well, they were going to go on a world tour. And we did. We went to Australia and then New Zealand and South America and then Africa and up to Europe. We were gone for better than 2 years. And every time I was in a town, I would write a letter to Betty Burke, right? And I'd tell her where we'd be next. And every time we got to the next town, by golly, there was a letter there from Betty Burke. It made that whole 2 years go by a whole lot nicer, because every town there was a letter there from Betty Burke. Well, when we got back to the United States, we had to run right away to St. Louis, Missouri, because the World's Fair was going on, and we were going to be part of the entertainment there. So we were there, and about the second or third night, I don't remember which, I got done with my roping, and I went back to my dressing room. Well, it was a tent, is what it was. And I was in my tent, and somebody was knocking on the tent pole. And I lifted the flap, and by golly, there was Betty Burke. She had come all the way from Arkansas just to see me perform in the Wild West show. 2 days later, I asked her to marry me, and she agreed. Best thing I ever done in my life. So we went around with the Wild West shows and then vaudeville. And finally, somebody saw me and thought that I would be good in Broadway. So they took my name up to Mr. Ziegfeld in New York, and they agreed to give me a contract to go to perform in New York City. And they were going to pay me a whole lot more. So two things. Number one, I was getting more money. And secondly, we would have a place to live, to stay in one place and start our family. Okay? So I took it. Now, the one thing they didn't tell me was that it cost significantly more to live in New York City. So we weren't doing that much better. However, at the Ziegfeld Follies, you could do extra things and make some extra money. There was a number of good things about the Ziegfeld Follies. One, I was backstage with all the Ziegfeld girls. I was married and I didn't touch, but boy, I looked, I'll tell you. But one day, W.C. Fields and Fanny Brice came, and they had an idea for a skit, see? And they needed somebody to play their baby. And I, being no more smart than I am now, sure, I'll do it. So they dressed me up in this long white gown, and they had this huge perambulator built with this great big bottle of milk. And all I had to do was lay in the perambulator and drink. I could do that. So we practiced it. But the first night, the night that we were actually going to do it in front of an audience, they wheeled me out, and I picked up the bottle, and, well, what W.C. Fields did was he switched the milk for gin. Now I'm told that skit didn't go over terribly well, but boy, did I have a good time. I did. I had a good time. Well, here I am doing this same rope tricks at 34 years old now. I'm doing the same rope tricks I'd been doing since 17. It was embarrassing. The only thing more embarrassing was people were willing to pay to come and watch me. And I couldn't even do my best stuff. I mean, you couldn't have cattle running across the stage or cowboys riding across the stage. Well, I did have one cowboy there. His name was Tom Mix. And his wonder horse, Tony, and I would rope him every night while he just stood there, and the audience thought that was great. Well, I was just a little embarrassed about nothing. I wasn't going anywhere. Well, one night I was on stage, and I'd finished my rope tricks, and I was about to leave, and the stage manager over there, he gives me one of these things, What that means is the next act isn't ready to come out. And Flo Ziegfeld did not allow an empty stage. So they expected me to stay out there. Well, I thought about it. I had done all the rope tricks that I could do, and more importantly, they had seen them all. So I started talking, and they haven't been able to shut me up since. Well, I went on the radio, and then they called me out to Hollywood to be in the movies. Now, there's two things I can tell you about me in the movies. Number one is I'm the ugliest guy in them. I mean, there's no question about that. The second thing is that after 15 years of doing movies out there, I'm still with the same wife I started with. Well, really good people applaud at that, but don't feel obligated. Don't. Tom Mix followed me out, and he became a star of his own. Tom Mix and his wonder horse Tony, that Tony looked so good on the film. People would come up to me and ask me about that, just exactly how smart is that horse? Now, listen, I've known those two guys for a long, long time, and I assure them that Tom is at least as smart as Tony is. Now, I also went on the circuit, doing shows in different towns, and one of them, an editor of a newspaper, wanted to print something that I'd done, so I let him do that. 1 year later, now I'm doing this every week. I got to write a column every week. It's appearing in over 500 newspapers. Now, people come to me all the time, want to talk about my articles. Well, I do it every week, folks. When I get done with one, I forget it. It's done. Listen, folks, I get paid writing wages. I do not get paid reading wages. So when I'm done with it, I'm done. But I'll tell you, there's nothing that I like better than the daily newspaper. Everything I know, I've read in the newspaper. So what I do as part of my act is that I pick up the daily newspaper from whatever town I'm going to, and I put it on the stage without looking at it first. And then I'll go through it, and at some point I'll comment on what's in the paper. Papers are always good. They've never let me down. Till today. Oh, well, I love it. Here's a great article here. Congress is deadlocked and cannot act. There's hope for us yet, folks. There's hope for us yet. Well, over here there's one that you probably heard about. In New York City, the bar owners are asking them to allow them to keep the bars open till 3 o'clock. Right now, they got to close at 2, you see, and they want them to stay open till 3. I don't know. If you can't get drunk by 2 o'clock, you aren't trying. Now here's an ironic thing. On this page, there's a picture of a black man, and he's in his bib overalls, and they got him hooked up to one of those truth-telling machines, And on the very next page is a picture of 2 Wall Street bankers, and they're testifying before a congressional committee. You know what they got on those two birds? Silk shirts. It's all ironic to me. Well, here's a oh, well, this is a good story. Youth march on Washington opposed to war. I'll have to explain this to you folks. You see, over in Asia, Japan and China are fighting in Manchuria. And for some reason that I cannot fathom, the United States government has decided to send a gunboat over there to patrol the Yangtze River, you know, with our Marines on it. Now, consider if it was the other way around. What would we do if the Chinese were to send a gunboat over here and with their Marines on it and go up and down the Mississippi, you know? They can always say that they're protecting their laundries in Memphis, I suppose. I don't know why we're doing that. You know, if 3 people anywhere in the world ask us to send Marines, we do it. I mean, that's why we got Marines over there in the Yangtze River, and we got them in Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela, and we got them over in the Red Sea in the Middle East. I saw something the other day, folks, that probably none of you have ever seen. I saw a Marine in the United States. Well, you all know that it's the thing we do worse than anything else, the world, is that we, you know, minding other people's business. Right? Well, so the joke now, though, is on the kids, you see. The joke is on the kids, because China and Japan says there isn't any war. And the League of Nations over there in Europe says there ain't no war. And the United States government says there ain't no war. The only ones who think it's a war are those Marines on that gunboat that are getting shot at. They say it's the damnedest imitation of a war they've ever seen. War, folks. Folks, war. Why do we do this? I mean, everybody else in the world seems to be getting along all right. The grass and the trees and I mean, even the animals, the giraffes and the monkeys and what, they all seem to get along. Why every 20 years or so do we feel an obligation to kill each other? And we got to stop it, folks. We got to figure out a way to stop war. And of course, I have some ideas for you. So here's number 1. The first one is pretty simple, you know. What you do is you pass a law that says no country can start a new war until they paid for the last one. It's not going to stop them, but it might slow them down a mite. I got another one. Now, it's a little more complicated, so you're going to have to watch me closely. Now, here's Germany, and here's France. Now, they have been fighting each other since they've been Germany and France, I think. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up France and move them, you know, like they did with the Cherokee in Georgia. Just move them, pick them up and move them, take them over here and put them where Japan is. Take the Japanese and put them over here where France is. And, well, the Germans are going to fight them anyway, but at least it'll be something different. So here are the British, the English and the Irish. They have been cheek by jowl for as long as anyone can remember. Just take the English and pick them up and move them. Put them over here in Canada. Let them live off their son-in-laws for a while. Just don't tell the Irish where they are, because they'll go get them. No, I know those ideas won't work, folks. I know that. But we got to do something about this. Now, I never made it into the 5th grade. All of you have more education than I do. So all I'm going to do is present the problem to you. I expect you to go home and figure it out, all right? So next time you see me, you tell me how to stop war, will you? This is your job, all right? Well, my editors were looking at what was going on over there in Europe, and they thought that maybe there was going to be something going on over there that should be looked into, so they wanted me to go and look. Well, I hadn't been out of the country for a while, so I had to get a new passport. So I went down to in the bowels of New York City, in the Federal Building there, to get me a passport. And I go in, well, the nice lady, I met, nice lady. She says, no problem, Mr. Rogers. All you have to do is bring in your birth certificate. Well, it's a problem, you see. See, I was born in the Indian Territory, and they didn't give out birth certificates in the Indian Territory. And we're very, very trusting in Oklahoma. You know, if people are up and walking around, we assumed at one time or another they'd been born, you know. So I told her I didn't have a birth certificate, couldn't provide one to her. So she said, not to worry, Mr. Rogers, not to worry. All you need is 2 people who can sign an affidavit that at one time or another you were born. Well, there's a problem with that, you see. The only two people that were there at the time was my mother and I, and she has been deceased, and I barely remember it at all. After all, it was a private function. It was not a public affair. So I couldn't do it. I didn't have that. So, well, I went back to my editors, and I told them I can't go. You might not believe this, folks, but there are people that have more influence than we do. 2 days later, I had a passport, and I'm off to Europe, all right? So the first place I go was Rome, Italy. Now, there's a city that was not built in a day. There are more churches and less praying in that town than anywhere else in the world. I was going to see Mr. Mussolini. Now, it was all arranged by the ambassador, you know. And when I got there, I know I embarrassed the ambassador. I know I did. I didn't mean to, but I did. You know, he came dressed as an ambassador, you know, like a head waiter. And I came dressed approximately the way I am now. You know. But there's something you got to understand about that. You know, if I'm not dressed approximately the way I am now, I may have to be naked. And I figured that would embarrass him more. Well, I got in to see Mr. Mussolini. Oh, did you know he's a little short guy? He's a little short guy. You know, we all think he's very tall because the pictures of him are always from the piazza looking up at the balcony, you know. So we think he's tall. He's got a big chin and big shoulders, but he's a little short. He's a twerp. He's a little short guy. So he said, well, I understand that you're here to interview me. And I said, no, I'm not here to do that. I just want to sit down and talk with you for a while and figure out what kind of bird you are, that's all. So he gave me 45 minutes, and we sat around talking in broken English, both of us. I went to England, and I was shown around by the Prince of Wales. Now we give that person far too much problem in this country. We do. If you remember, not too long ago, in the photogravure section of the newspaper, there was a picture of him, and his horse had fallen, and he was sprawled on the ground. And of course, we in America, who know better than anyone, you know, well, the man can't even ride. Well, come on, folks. Listen, I have ridden all my life, and I know a number of months prior to that, and I just know that if your horse falls, you have a tendency to fall with him. I have not met that rider yet who can stay up in the air and wait for the horse to right himself. Well, the prince showed me around. In the first couple of days, I had a little trouble with him. I just did. Well, the problem was I didn't know what to call him. You know, I was saying Prince. I felt like I was talking to a dog, you see. Well, from there I went to Russia. Oh, folks, what's this country coming to? Have you heard people say that? What's this country coming to? With all the taxes, all the income taxes people have to pay. What's this? Well, let me tell you, folks, there's probably somebody in Washington who, if you don't like it here, could find you, could get you to wherever you want in the world. But I've probably been there. This is better, all right? But if you're really concerned about the income tax, I can tell you a good news from Russia. There is no income tax in Russia. Of course, there's no income in Russia. So, well, let's see. I'm assuming that a lot of you wanted me to talk about politicians. So let's start doing that. Well, we'll start with presidents. The first president I met was Warren G. Harding. Now, two things I can tell you about Warren G. Harding. Number one is that he had an unpronounceable middle name. It's Giglia or Guglia or something like that. You look it up in your encyclopedia. You won't be able to pronounce it either. The second thing was that he played a slide trombone in a little country band in Ohio. And the people in Washington thought there was going to be a musical renaissance. Have you ever heard a slide trombone being played a cappella by a president? Mrs. Harding was kind of fastidious, so when she got to the White House, she decided that there would be no drinking, no gambling, and no smoking in the White House. So Mr. Harding spent a good deal of his time across the street at the Willard Hotel, smoking and drinking and gambling with his friends. I went in to see the president one day, and I said, Mr. President, I'm here to tell you all the latest political jokes. And he said, you're too late, Will. I already appointed them. And he did. I mean, it was a scandal-ridden administration. I'll just give you an example. Mr. Fall, who was the Interior Secretary, decided to sell the Navy reserves of oil to Mr. Sinclair without telling the Navy. Well, without telling anyone. As a matter of fact, he kept the money himself. Harding was followed by Kelvin Coolidge. Now, I'm not supposed to have a favorite president, but boy, I really liked Silent Kel. I did. It's true, he did nothing as president, but that's what the country wanted. They want nothing done. And it wasn't just that he'd done nothing. He did it better than anybody else. Did you know he was a little short guy, too? Just like Mussolini, a little short guy. The only problem is he didn't have any chin, he didn't have any shoulders at all. But he had this tall, statuesque, beautiful first lady, probably the most beautiful first lady we've ever had in the White House. And what she saw in him, I don't know. But they agreed on politics. They were very conservative. Now, I went to the White House one time for dinner. They invited me to dinner, and I got all the way to the front door. Nobody bothered me at all. I knocked on the front door, and who opened the door but Kelvin Coolidge? It turns out that they had released the people that worked at the White House to save money. So, okay, well, I go in, and I sit at the table. Do you know that they allow their dogs to sit right at the table with them? Now, it didn't bother me that they were sitting there. I was just concerned that they might get more than me. But that was until I found out that she had also laid off the kitchen staff, you see. And she did the cooking that night. She brought out a fish hash. It was a memorable meal. I remembered it. I remembered it for days and days and days. Now, I can do a mean imitation of Kelvin. I'll do that for you, as a matter of fact. Doing the State of the Union address. Now, the Constitution calls that the President is supposed to give a State of the Union every year. Now, from Jefferson to Wilson, it was always in writing, but Mr. Wilson decided to do it before a joint session of Congress, and it's been that way ever since. So Kelvin Coolidge gets up before the joint session of Congress, and he goes, now you noticed my lips weren't moving. He was a true conservative. He didn't feel that you should use any muscles that weren't absolutely necessary to use. So he went through the whole thing, and nobody ever heard what he said. But I know what he said, so I'll give it to you here. He said, my fellow Americans, on the whole, the economy is doing well. That doesn't mean that the whole economy is doing well, just that on the whole it's doing well. Some people are in the hole. Right? Everyone I meet is doing well. If they're not doing well, they don't meet me. One day there was a woman reporter. Boy, there weren't many women reporters at the time. And there was a woman reporter at a reception, you see. And she was being razzed a little bit by other reporters. And so she made a bet with them. And she went over to Mr. Coolidge and she said, Mr. Coolidge, I made a bet with those people over there that I could get you to say more than 3 words. And he said, you lose. Well, I had an opportunity to go to the 1928 political conventions as a reporter. Now, I was supposed to report humorously on the conventions, and the other reporters were supposed to report seriously. And I had by far the easier job, because all I had to do was say what was going on. They had to try to explain it. Well, the Republican convention was held in Chicago, and the stockyards were right here, and the convention center was right here. And there were fumes raising from both. It was a heady brew, folks. It was a heady brew. I went to the first session, and the first thing that happened was this woman got up to sing. And she sang the Star-Spangled Banner, you know, our national anthem. And she did it with no notes. And people applauded. I think it was because she knew the words and didn't need notes. But then she sang America, and then she sang America the Beautiful, and then she sang Dixie. The woman would not stop singing. So they started with prayers. Let me tell you, folks, if God can feel good about the Republican Party the way they've been acting lately, I mean, the rest of us have a free card. We're going to go free. So they did the Keynote Prayer, all right? The Keynote Prayer, I listened very carefully. He never mentioned God or Jesus once. Oh, but he did mention our Savior. But then I found out he was talking about Hoover. That's the way they do it, folks. It's the engineer, and then the rail splitter, and finally the carpenter. That's still right. Well, I went to the Democratic convention, and I thought I came late, because when I got there, they were already arguing down on the floor. I mean, it wasn't just an argument. I mean, it was major scuffling going, some pushing, almost fisticuffs, you know. And I asked the regular reporters, you know, am I late? And they said, no. Well, what's going on? They said, well, it's the Democrats. Like there wasn't any other explanation necessary, you see. Now, what do you suppose they were arguing about down there? You suppose they were arguing about world peace or feeding children or education or something? No, there was a 3-member delegation, and they didn't know where to set them, you know, whether on the floor, in the balcony, or out in the parking lot. That's what they were arguing. Listen, folks, you seem like a nice group of people, so I'll tell you something that I normally don't tell anyone. But I do not belong to any organized political party. I am a Democrat. Well, Mr. Hoover got to be president, right? And he decided that he was going to make the government as small as possible by eliminating things. So he decided he was going to eliminate anything that didn't work. In the first month in office, he eliminated 3 departments. So I just want Congress to know, you know, that they're being watched. If there's one group that isn't working. And so things did not work out well. He was probably the most qualified man ever to run for president. And what we found out is that qualification is not a qualification. Things went bad. There's a lot of unemployment, a lot of people out of work. People were losing their homes. Out there in my state of Oklahoma, people were loading up their cars from their homes because they'd lost their homes. Listen, folks, we're going to be the first generation to go to the poorhouse in a car. Some of them were loading up to go to California because they thought there was work there. Well, there was one good thing about all those Oklahomans going to California. It raised the IQ of both states. Well, I never wanted to be in public office, but they come to me one day with this offer to be the mayor of Beverly Hills. Now, it was the honorary mayor of Beverly Hills. I didn't have to run for election, and I wouldn't get paid, but I didn't have to do anything. It seemed like a normal government job. So I took it. You know? Now, Mr. Roosevelt was coming to Beverly Hills. He was running for president. And I decided, well, I should go as the honorary mayor, right? So I went. And when I got there, I found out that they had already decided that I should do the introduction. Now, I hadn't prepared to do an introduction. But they assumed, you're a professional, you can just do it. Now, this may not look like it to you, but this is all prepared. So I was not prepared. So I did a really bad introduction. I know I did. And I confessed that to Mr. Roosevelt. I said, Mr. Roosevelt, I'm sorry, that it just wasn't a very good introduction. But understand now, you're only a candidate. You know, come back when you're president, and I'll do a whole lot better job. Well, we don't know what's going on. I mean, the accountants don't know what's going on. We certainly don't know what's going on. We're just going to let Roosevelt do whatever he wants to bring us back out of all this. I was invited to come to the dedication of Hoover Dam, okay? Biggest water project that the world has ever seen since Noah built the ark, right? It's this big dam between Arizona and Nevada with water coming up behind it. The only thing California is getting out of it is all the water. Now, the Democrats are upset about that name, Hoover Dam. And I said, well, no, they should just leave the name alone. If you want to do anything, just reverse the words. Well, I got one thing that I want to do for sure before I leave here. And it all depends on my being able to find something. Now, Betty says that I'm the most disorganized man in the world. And I know she doesn't know that because she hasn't met every man in the world. There must be somebody out there that's more disorganized than I am. But let me see what I can. Oh, here it is. Boy, here it is. The only explanation for my finding it is I must have misplaced it. That's all. So as you can see, it's a Western Union telegram. It's from a senator from Montana who saw something that I'd written about something that they were playing around with there in Washington. And he wants to put it in the congressional record. Oh, I'm not bragging, folks. No, the congressional record is the most commonest document you can see. Any senator or any representative can put anything in it they want. And the problem is that they generally do. No, I'm just giving you this story to make a point, all right? So the senator from Montana is in the Senate, and he gets up. I'm sorry, no, senators don't get up. They rise. They rise. So he rose, and having risen, he asked for permission to speak, and he asked for the floor. Now that means that if they recognize him, then he can have the floor and talk for as long as he wants to. That's another problem, is that they generally do. Listen, folks, I can shorten the whole business in Washington by a whole lot if we just pass a law that says that any senator or representative had to sit down after they said everything they knew. Some of those birds would never get out of their chairs, you know. Well, he got up and he rose. He rose and he made the motion that this thing be put in the congressional record. Well, this senator from Maine gets up. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He rises, and he says, "Will the gentleman from Montana yield?" Now, they call each other gentlemen in the Senate. I don't know why, but they do. But they make that word sound a whole lot more like polecat than, "Will the polecat from Montana yield?" Oh, yielding. I got to explain yielding to you. You see, the senator from Montana has the floor, which means he can talk as long as he wants to. What the senator from Maine wants to do is have him yield the floor to him so he can talk as long as he wants to, you see. So, well, after all the rising and all the yielding is done, the senator from Maine says, "I object to the words of professional joke maker being put into the congressional record." So he was taking a crack at me, you see. Well, I do make jokes. There's no malice in my heart, however, so there can be no malice in my jokes. I cannot say the same for them. And I object to being called a professional joke maker. I mean, when I make a joke, it's a joke. When they make a joke, it's a law. And too often when they make a law, it's a joke. Well, when I leave here now, I'm going back to California, and Wiley Post, the great aviator, and I are going up to Alaska. I've been all over the world, and for some reason I never made it to Alaska. I don't know why, but I'm going to go up there and I'm going to have a look around, and I want to talk to them Eskimos, you know, as an American Indian. I want to warn them about the government, you know, tell them about the grass and water business, you know. So that's where I'm going next. Betty just saw the wanderlust in my eyes, and she said, "Well, you better get going." So that's where we're going to go now. I've heard from people all over the world that just don't feel that things are being worked just exactly correctly, but they don't feel that they're qualified to take on some of the things that there are, you know, like being president or being a senator or being a CEO for a company, and they're probably right, you know. They're probably right. You probably don't feel qualified to do that. But I believe that everybody in the world is ignorant, but just on different subjects is all. I mean, come on, folks, would you want the president to fix your plumbing? All right, so don't worry about it. Well, I have a little mantra, a little statement that I use at the end of every session that I do. It's I did it a number of years ago, and I liked it so much. Well, I liked it so much, as a matter of fact, that I've asked them to put it on my tombstone, and I can hardly wait, you know, for death to see it there. I will, though, but it's just the way I feel about the world, and I've met people all over the world, and I can tell you truthfully, folks, I have never met a man I didn't like.